Channel Staxx, baby.
We haven't probably seen a good flick like this since, what'd you say, Zero Casino, maybe?
Yeah, Goodfellas.
Goodfellas?
Doing good. We're on set here filming, bringing you live from the Park Motel, a rundown seedy section of Florida City.
When I was doing promotional work for Street Smart all along up to that point, I've done other press and other podcasts. They kept on saying, we're going to talk about his role in The Irishman and then Street Smart, his role in The Irishman. I want to say, what role?
I would walk around the corner and everybody would stuff dollar bills in my pocket. By the time I got home, I had $6-7 in my pocket. It was like big time. And I was a little kid,
Italian mother, Italian father. Nobody spoke English in the family. A lot of fights because they used to make fun of me because I didn't speak English. Yeah. And just grew up tough Bronx boy.
The first time I remember actually meeting him was, I guess, 1969, 1970. My father was in with Papa Doc Duvalier, and he was running boats. They called them junkets with gamblers to Haiti.
Welcome to this episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Larry Rolla. What's up, Larry?
Hi, Bill.
Thanks for joining me again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. My pleasure.
Definitely. A lot of people love your stories, and I get a lot of comments. They keep saying, bring Larry back. We love when he tells us stories. So we're bringing you back for the people. People really like you, man.
Well, I got a lot of stories. Just tell me which one you want to hear.
I mean, we can start wherever you want. Wherever.
I see that picture you have up there. That looks like one night I raced at Green Mountain. Maybe 30 degrees, 25 degrees. The snow was coming down. And I had about 5 or 6 horses in that night. It was the racetrack was Green Mountain Park. It's in Pinole, Vermont, and the winters were brutal. And I had 5 or 6 horses in that night. And the last race, there was a bad accident, and the last race went off around 5 minutes to midnight. And there was an accident, and I went down. I got trampled by a few horses, and at them smaller racetracks, they had no ambulance. They had nothing. You got in a wreck. You had to take care of yourself. So everybody winds up getting up. A bunch of guys come out. They grab the horses and everything, and the drivers, me and maybe 3 or 4 other guys that got trampled. We went into the locker room, and colors, the jumpsuits, we had about a ½ inch of ice on it from racing all night. And so I went to unzip my jumpsuit, my colors, and my arm wouldn't work. So I asked, there was a guy there, another driver, George Sadowski. I says, George, help me with the zipper. So I got my left hand and I start pounding all the ice off the zipper. And he was trying to pull down the zipper, and he got it down and helped me with my colors off. And when we got my right arm out, it just fell limp. It was broken in half, and I didn't even feel it. That's how cold it was up there. You just froze, and it was terrible. And probably worse than that was when it started to thaw out. The track was 3, 4, 5 inches of mud, the whole barn area. It was just a terrible, terrible place to race. And then after that, they took me to the hospital. The hospital tells me that the x-ray technician went home, and there's nobody here to take x-rays. You have to come back in the morning. I says, you realize my arm is hanging? And so they strapped it up. They gave me a couple of pain pills, and I had to come back in the morning. That's what that photograph reminds me of. And that's what these guys go through racing at these smaller racetracks. It's a horror, and I sit here now, 30, 40 years later, and wonder how the hell I did it and how I lived through that. But it's for the love of the horse, the love of the game, and you just do it. It becomes a way of life after a while.
But the money, right? Money comes addicting too.
Well, yeah. Well, back then, back then, I wasn't in any trouble. I had just got barred from Yonkers for something I didn't do, and they just threw me out. The owner of the racetrack, Tannenbaum, he threw me out he accused me of stiffing a horse. I didn't stiff him, but
what does that mean when you stiff a horse for the people out there that don't?
It means that you didn't try to win, just hold them back, and that was not the case. I won't go into that because it's a long story, and I'll get aggravated, and I'll wind up throwing his computer out the window. But because that decision that he made, it took me from a guy that was a bad kid that turned into a good kid that really wanted to do the right thing. And that decision that he made, accusing me of not trying to win, and he was the owner of the racetrack, so he had the right to do it, but no judge, no jury, no nothing. It was just his opinion. Never even called me in and asked me what the problem was. I was just locked in. I couldn't get out. I was climbing over horses, finishing. But because of that decision, I was barred from all New York racetracks, and sent me to places like that picture, like Green Mountain Park, where the purses are $800. It's impossible to make a living, and it just their decisions. They turn nice kids into vicious pricks. I mean, they just don't care. They just make these crazy decisions that destroy lives. So anyway, after that, I went to another racetrack, just as bad. And then there come a time when I think it was in 1971, they opened up a track, and I don't know if I said this in the last podcast because I do my own podcast, and I don't remember if I said this. If I did, I think I mentioned this as we closed last time. I went to Lincoln Downs. It was the first time in Boston. It was the first time they had harness racing up there, and I went up there, and that whole area there was controlled by the Winter Hill Gang and Whitey Bulger and that whole crew, and I think we left off last time where I was sitting in the shed row. They gave me stalls there, and it was a small time racetrack. The handle wasn't very big, but it was a lot bigger than where I was racing at, and these three guys come down the shed row. They were part of that Winter Hill Gang of Whitey Bulger, that whole crew. And they said, "You Larry Rolla?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "You're interested in making money?" And well, at that time, I went through 4 years of total starvation, racing at all of these racetracks with no
eating pigeons, right? Eating pigeons.
Yeah. Well, and thank God, there was a black guy, Odell, who I was so hungry. I had no money. The purse money goes to the owners of the horses, and you wind up crimping oats and eating oats, and one day down the end of the shed row, there was a couple of black grooms that were there, and they were catching pigeons, and then they catch them and they kill them and they buck them. And I walked down there, and I was introduced to pigeons, and it's if you ever been hungry for 3-4 days in a row,
I don't know about that hungry, man. Pigeon hungry. I mean, maybe, I guess.
it tastes good, and you look forward to to your next meal. But anyway, they asked me. They said, "You interested in making any money?" And I wanted to jump up and kiss him on the lips, But they were three muscle-bound guys, and I grew up around that stuff. So I was glad that they were there. I was so interested in hearing what they had to say, but I wasn't going to turn into a mutt just because I was broken. So I said, "Yeah, what you have in mind?" And they said, "You have two horses in today. They're both favorites. We'll give you $200 for each horse, and I'll have my vet. Just tell me the stall number they're in. I'll have my vet come and treat them. And this way, they'll be finish up the racetrack."
Now, what would their vet give them? What type of stuff would they do
Well,
to the horse?
Back then, now this was in 1970, so this is 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Back then, they would probably what I believe, and I found this out later because up until that point, I never got involved in any of that stuff. But they can give them a tranquilizer. They can give them acepromazine, or they can give them a longer-acting tranquilizer that would last maybe 30 days. And but none of that stuff was a sure shot, because if you got a high-strung horse, the tranquilizer would actually make them better. But and none of that was a sure shot. And what they would do to ensure something like that, they would take big cotton balls and shove them all the way up one nostril, all the way far up, so they couldn't blow it out. And they would do all of these things just so the horse couldn't get all his air, or it was tranquilizer, or a combination of both. And this way the horse couldn't perform. And they would bet they would do that to 3-4 horses in the race, and then bet the other horses in trifectas or exactas or whatever they were doing. Up to that point, I wasn't interested in none of that. None of that betting or anything ever came into my mind, and I certainly wouldn't do any of that to a horse. But I needed the money. I was broke. I was hungry. I must have lost 40 pounds. So I said, "What do you have in mind?" And he told me that, and I said, "Listen," I says, "I want 500 a horse and tell your vet to stay home." So he looked at me with that typical wise guy bullshit look, and he starts laughing, and he says, "You know who you're talking to?" And I says, "It really don't make a difference who I'm talking to." He says, "That's the deal. You take it or go see somebody else." So he says, "Well, you got the morning line favorites. That's what we need out." He says, "I'll give you the 500 a horse, but you better know, you better do what you said, and because I'll be back in the morning." And I said, that's good.
Now the race, when you go through the race, right? Are you nervous? What's that first race like?
No, I'm not nervous, because all you have to do is not try to win. I mean, it's no big deal. I mean, if me and you had a race down the street, and I bet on you, all I have to do is not beat you. So it just get yourself lost in the shuffle of the race and just finish back. And that's what I did. But I you can't let these guys run over you. First of all, the same way that guy grew up, that's the same way I grew up. So you weren't going to intimidate me and all that bullshit mob talk and all your size and everything. None of that bothered me. I grew up with that stuff. In fact, I ran away from that stuff. And when I see it or hear it, it just bothers me more. You got no chance. So the next morning, could be. I told him was, I says, what my word is better than anything your vet can give me. So he counts out the money. He says, I sure hope you know what you're doing because I'll be back in the morning. And I said, that's good. Just bring me coffee, no sugar, and bring a bagel with it. And sure enough, the next morning he showed up with the coffee and the bagel. And I did with both horses what I said I would do. And I had $1,000 in my pocket, which at the time was like a zillion. And he was happy, and his whole attitude changed. And he said, "Do you think you can get any other guys to go along with this? We can make a lot of money. This meet's about 3 months long." And so I said, I'll try. I knew that I could because at them racetracks, everybody was in the same position as me, and some of them had other jobs and they did the horses as a hobby. Some of them had their wives working, and it was just the love of the sport, the love of the horse, and I loved it too. You kind of get caught up in that stuff.
Yeah, but have you ever came across somebody who didn't want to participate with this type of stuff?
Oh yeah, later on. I mean,
did they ever threaten to out you?
Well, they never threatened me. Because I was after this incident. After this incident, we went on for the whole meet about three months, and within a week I had 7-8 other drivers that would go along with this. So I was setting everything up. So it made no difference who he was. His name was Tony Schuler, a big fat jerk, but he was fixing races back there for that whole crew for years at all the thoroughbred racetracks around there. And this was the first standardbred racetrack, the Trotters. So he didn't know anybody there. So I was the first one that he met. And probably I asked him later on, why'd you come to me? He said, well, 2 reasons. You had the morning line favorite, and you were Italian. So, whether it's a bullshit excuse or not, he got to me, and I was glad that he did. But it started me on the road to doing what I had to do to survive. And so that's what I did. By the end of the meet, we had 7 or 8 guys working, made a lot of money, and I left there with probably $30,000 or $40,000, which was more money than I ever seen in my life up to that point. And from there I went to Freehold Racetrack, and I thought that deal with me and him was over because he was a Boston guy. He was Whitey Bulger and that.
Where is that racetrack? The one that you're going to?
And the racetrack I left from there with Freehold, New Jersey.
Oh, so you went from Boston to New Jersey,
right?
And you're like our relationship's over because he's up in Boston.
Well, yeah, I didn't say that. I just assumed that. The meet's over. That was the last. In fact, the last race. I think we bet on one race, and so the guy ran over the money, meaning that he took money and then he finished where he wasn't supposed to, and we wind up losing the bet. But there was nothing you could do when that happens. When somebody takes the money and that happens, you just wait. You just write it off and you make it up the next time. You go back to the same guy and say, look, you're not going to get no 500. You're going to get nothing because you ran over the money last time. And that's how it works.